Welcome to Modern Aikidoist Podcast. My sincere thanks to listeners and those who have liked, subscribed, and commented. Your interest is noticed and deeply appreciated. This podcast is the second of two segments in a conversation about Atemi, which is striking in Aikido. It's a really great conversation and very informative. Enjoy. And I think when we
Well,
when we get on the
you're doing
mat, we see the
Aikido.
physical expression of that very same thing.
Yeah, because you're doing it in that relationship. You're doing Aikido around something as opposed to with something, right?
Correct.
So like you want, when people want to talk about harmony and blending and all that stuff, well, that involves being in, it doesn't involve going around. It involves being in. I mean,
Or
that's
staying
that's
out of.
yeah, and but that's irimi,
Mm-hmm.
So like there is no Aikido without irimi. Well, irimi means committing, like it's committing your body to this place, to this moment, um, so that you are actually in and involved, and I think this is well, one thing, actually, back to what you're saying about taking initiative. Stanley Brennan, the late Stanley Brennan, did amazing work, obviously, with Aikido Journal and all of that. He did an article with video evidence about the fact that that O-sensei never waited for someone to attack him. He always initiated the attack. He presented the hand that he wanted them to grab in a way that would allow him to do the technique that he wanted them to do, that he wanted to do on them. Well, if you do that with violence added to it, you're not presenting a hand, you're presenting a strike, and I think that in a way maybe it just got lazy over the years, and I mean that's a terrible thing to say, obviously, but I think that he was just getting the result that he wanted so easily that the Atemi just sort of disappeared.
Mm.
And but that every time that you watch him present his hand to someone, really to their face, quite often, that if you imagine that he added something behind that, then you see where the Atemi fit in. And then even, when he applies Ikkyo or something like that, that the even the application of the hand that's at the triceps, to do the Ikkyo, to rise and fall through the movement, that is Atemi. The getting someone to the ground after that point, that's Atemi. I mean, at some point I came up with this equation that, and I'm terrible with math, but I thought about it this way, and I still use this as a teaching model, but that um, irimi plus atemi equals kazushi, right? So the result of a good technique is kazushi, right? Is off
Mm-hmm.
balancing, but the way that that's initiated is through irimi and atemi. That you're entering with a striking body, that you're displacing a person with your body that is also a striking mechanism, or and that the result of that is that they are off balance, and that is Aikido. That you're fitting into them in such a way that it's no longer their choice what happens next, right? That's the kazushi aspect. Now, if you start training with people who are really good at other things, like really good at Muay Thai, like, my brother is an example, or if you start training stand up with people who are good grapplers, um, um, and if you end up doing newas and things like that, then you really have to start asking yourself, how do I fit myself into this so as to accomplish the kazushi through the irimi, through the atemi, in a way that's going to work against this new um, input that hasn't read the script, right? So a perfect example is, again, like I said, we've just been practicing Tenchinage lately. If you don't come up through the middle, a good grappler is, if it's not a strike, if the Tenchinage is not based in Atemi, then if you just treat it like arm's length grappling, when you rise up through the center, the person you're doing it to, if they know what they're doing, is going to duck under it and take your back, and then you are going to lose. Once somebody's taken your back, if they're good at grappling, you really have a hard time getting out. They're 1 to 2 steps already ahead of you, right? So that shouldn't mean, if you have that experience, it shouldn't mean that you therefore should then disavow training with grapplers because they're not playing by the rules. It should mean that you ask yourself, how do I do this technique in a way that does work against someone who's not doing the thing that I want them to do, right? That's where harmony comes in. It's like, how do I work with the person who's not doing the thing I want them to do? How do I make it so that this circumstance really works out in the way that I'm hoping that it does? And I think that what ends up happening is people shut out this potential for improvement through cross training. One, because it's hard to find good cross training partners. Like, it's really difficult to find people who are interested in letting you experiment with this kind of stuff. But that aside, the whole idea that there is any level of competition involved, and whether it's just through freestyle training or whatever, but any level of resistance involved is sort of shunned as being anti-harmony or anti-Aikido. But the fact is that violence is always competitive. It may not be competitive for you, but it's competitive for the predator.
Absolutely.
And so if you don't train against something that is at least in a small sense of, if there isn't even a small sense of what an actual predator is going to be doing, then you're never going to know what true, what you're capable of within the context of violence. So there has to be some level of competition. It doesn't have to come from you, though. So like the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners that I know are never meeting force with force. They're always working at angles. They're always working with leverage. They're always working with trying to get to positions where you don't have the choice to attack back, right? That's not competing. That's
kind of like you said earlier. What is the definition of competition?
right.
I think there are so many Aikidoists that have no competition or physical culture background that the word competition brings up my strength meeting your strength, and whoever's strongest loses. Like, that is the assumed definition of competition, but I don't think that it is. And you make a great point about when you are attacked, if you just give up, your opponent, your attacker, he's competing with you. Yes, you can go pacifist, but what that will mean is that you will lose. His will be exacted upon you, and there's nothing that you can do about that. Your pacifism, no matter how peaceful or kind you are, will change the outcome. The outcome will be whatever he decides it will be. And I think that that's something that it's a romantic notion, the idea that you can, just by being such a nice and kind person, sort of melt the heart of the beast and appeal to his mercy. And it might happen. There's a small chance of it, but in my opinion, it's nothing you want to bet your life on, or your family's lives on, or your family's safety on.
No, and I mean, I was definitely an idealistic teenager, and when I was in my early 20s,
I think we all were idealistic teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, right? And I had this mentor who, I mean, really just an older friend of mine. He was one of the people that got me into martial arts, but he had done some, let's just say, combative work when he was younger. And, with real violence in a different country, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember talking to him, and I was like, I was very much digging into Buddhism and Taoism and stuff like that at the time. And I was like, well, when people use violence against you, it's really to their own detriment, because, as long as you're not violent back, then they're the one that suffers, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, look at the Tibetan, this is when China was like taking over Tibet, and it's like, look at the Tibetan monks. It's really the Chinese who are suffering. And he said, this is a little bit crude, but he said, yeah, ask them that when they're ask the Tibetans how they feel when they're hanging up from trees by their intestines. And that's the thing, right? Violence is terrible. Like, it's not It's not a wrist grab. It's not a punch. It's not even a headlock or a choke. It's terrible. It's there are, when you think about what actual violence entails, with wars, with muggings, rapes, murders, all these kind of things. This is not it's not the stuff we're practicing for in the dojo. So either we need to just accept that that's the case, right? Because quite frankly, it is. We're not really practicing for this stuff in the dojo, or we need to start looking at how what we're doing better suits that level of intensity, right? Even if it's just a fraction of that. I mean, in the Koryu, like jujitsu, historically speaking, it was never a reaction to an attack. It was actually the attack itself. So if you look at the Koryu grappling schools, plug for one of Ellis's books, Old School, gets into this a little bit as well. That if you look at the way that jujitsu was practiced in wartime, you were learning how to grab someone in such a way as to execute your technique and win, right? But it wasn't until peacetime that people started saying, well, if you grab me, then I'll do this to you, so then jujitsu becomes the counter to the grab, or the counter to the strike. But the old way that jujitsu was practiced, like one word for it is torite, which means taking hand, right? Like I am seizing the initiative from the very beginning. Again, going back to what Stanley Brennan wrote about with O-sensei, that he was taking the initiative from the beginning of the encounter and owning it through the entire encounter until it ended the way that he wanted. That was the Aikido that he was doing. And I think that that's where, going back to Atemi, that the grab is Atemi, right? The entry is Atemi. The throw is Atemi. I'm trying to throw you with a strike, right? I'm grappling with a striking body.
And you could say that I'm going to seize your mind. I'm going to capture your,
Yeah,
because then you will be responding. And I think from just a pure technical view, if I'm going to close distance with you to throw you, I have to cross through striking range to get there. And
absolutely.
like a wrestler would say, because I've known a couple of wrestlers, they'll say, I don't mind eating a shot even to the head if I get to your body. And they're pretty tough. Wrestlers are a pretty tough bunch. They don't mind taking a shot as they get in, because they know once they get there, it's going to be all their advantage. Whereas somebody who's maybe not quite as tough or is rigorously in good physical condition or strength that a wrestler has will still say, I have to cross that striking range, whether it's kicking range first, then probably punching range. But I got to get through that if I'm going to get to close range where I'm going to throw you. And that's where Aikido likes to do most of its work, is in that throwing range. So
Right.
to try to cross that striking range without any striking, or without any atemi, or without any, at least making your attacker concerned about letting you get there, I think
Right.
that's missing a very big chunk of hopology, or just martial arts in general, just fighting.
Yeah, and then you get into the argument, well, Aikido is not about fighting, or Aikido is not about being martial, and I don't know. I mean, you have to make that decision at some point. You have to, at some point, everybody has to decide, is the martial art that I'm or is the art that I'm practicing martial or not martial? Is the art that I'm practicing looking at, is it just a hobby? Am I learning to defend myself, or am I learning how to deal with predatory violence? Because social violence and predatory violence, two very different things. Like, as a pretty large adult male, the likelihood of me getting into a fight that I am not actively involved in from the beginning is very little, right? Because what it's going to take is what it takes is for me to put myself in a circumstance where fighting is more common, right? Like going to a bar,
Being where
being
young
in
men are drinking alcohol.
exactly, and where you know the testosterone is up, etc., etc. So like by just taking myself out of those circumstances, social violence becomes a lot less likely to be something that I have to worry about, right? But if you are um, if you are in those kinds of circumstances, like if you're a kid in high school or something like that, where you know you might be being picked on or bullied or something like that, then training for social violence is a very important thing, right? So like I always tell, you know, people, the for my daughter, for my wife, like I want them to learn how to defend themselves, quote unquote. But for someone for someone like me, the more of the likelihood of any kind of encounter that I'm going to get into is going to be because of my wife or my daughter, or because someone wants something that I have, right? Whether it's my wallet, my car, something like that. Well, that's a totally different kind of violence than a fist fight, right? So you have to then ask yourself, like, what is it that I'm training for? Am I training just because it's a hobby? Am I training because I'm concerned about social violence, about bullies, about bar fights, about dealing with the drunk uncle that always comes to the, you know, the Christmas party, whatever? Or am I training because I really need to consider the worst part of society, and the threat that that poses to me when I least expect it, or when my wife and my daughter are with me and I have no other choice but to defend myself and them, right? And that's a very, very different thing. But also that's where this concept of not not just being reactive and not just like Atemi plays into that. You know, that you have to be able to seize the initiative. You have to be able to um, you have to be able to take the space. You have to be able to, you know, to be on the dominant side of the encounter and not on the passive reactive side.
Yeah, and
If
you've
you know,
struck
if
on a
that's your genuine concern.
right, and you've struck on a fundamental that I've found in the security business in general, which is, let's say somebody goes to a bodyguard and says, "I want to hire you as a bodyguard," or hires a team of bodyguards. The first question is, against what? Like, what is the
Right.
threat? What are
Yep.
you what do you need to protect? Is it just you? Are you protecting things that you are carrying with you? Like, is this a transport? You know, what sort of is the threat a gang? Is the threat, you know, street thugs? Is it thieves? Is it, um, you know, a rival company? Is it, you know, what exactly, and where are we going? Like, what sort of threats are we going to run into? And I think the same thing holds true for any self-defense, just like you described, is what is the threat that you want to prepare yourself for, and therefore that dictates the type of training that you do when you identify where are you going to be, what are the typical threats, you know, what are the considerations that you need your training to fulfill for that. And I think when it comes back to the fighting, Aikido is not fighting, which I 50% agree with and 50% disagree with. The
Yeah,
part that
that's
I
a pretty fair
yeah,
stance to take.
right. The part that I disagree with is that Aikido is about surviving a fight. It purely is, and it always was. It was always designed to be that, and we could go into more of that. But the part that I disagree with is that Aikido seems to be about refusing to participate in fighting. I think that is
Yep.
completely false. The goal of Aikido is not to go around starting fights. The key of Aikido is stopping a fight as quickly as possible once it starts, even though somebody else might make that decision for you.
Even on a metaphorical side of things, like you could say that jujitsu is more about winning a fight, but then Aikido is more about winning a fight with your morality intact, right?
That's a good
So
way to
like
describe it.
if it's at the end of the day, you still need to come out alive and healthy, and you know, like uh that shouldn't be part of the question, right? So we should be training in such a way that allows us to survive first and foremost. Well, that means winning, and no matter what anybody wants to think, it means winning, right?
Mhm.
However, how do we win? That to me is more the question of that fascinates me with Aikido. You know, like do we are we able to win and also maintain our integrity? whatever that happens to mean for any given individual. And that is not to say in any way, shape, or form that it's the only martial art that offers that question. It's just not true. Like Christopher Lee out in Hawaii has written about this extensively, that this was stuff that was being talked about way before O-sensei came along. This idea of being able to bring peace to a violent situation, and things like that. That it's nothing new. So then the question is, well, how is Aikido unique in the way that it approaches that? And I think that brings us actually back to the other side of Atemi, which is the training your body in such a way as to be the striking implement, as to be the delivery mechanism for the Atemi. That gets into the internal strength side of things, in my opinion. And I'm not an expert on that at all. I am a student of it, and my teacher is much more fit to talk about that intelligently than myself. My experience of it has been mostly in trying to do it, whereas like through him I've experienced it being done, and those are two very different things. But I think that it's in the body conditioning side of things where that question about what Aikido is actually good for really comes into play. That if you aren't doing the internal strength practice and training as a baseline, then the Aikido really isn't the best martial art to be martially effective. And I say that sort of without apology, that without the Aiki side of things, which a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on what that means, but without that, then you might as well just be punching somebody in the face, because your body isn't going to be fit to do the Atemi as the irimi that's going to result in the kazushi. And that's just my opinion, though.
Well, that's a good a good point, in the fact that what other martial art out there does not require decent physical conditioning to execute? And I think the answer is virtually none. And this is something that I've heard Aikidoists say repeatedly. Well, you don't need to be strong or fit or in good shape to use Aikido or to be effective. And that kind of makes me wince a bit, because yes, technically it's true, but it's often used as an excuse why they aren't in good physical condition. They aren't strong or fit or flexible. They kind of just say, well, I don't need that, so I'm not going to be. Whereas, I mean, how many martial arts give you a tremendous advantage when you are strong, powerful, well-based, good structure, strong legs, strong core? All of these things are just straight out advantages. And the fact that Aikido, yes, you won't use those tools, a strong body, by running straight into a rock. You're going to move around it, but you do need that physicality if you are going to be effective. And there's a splendid example of the counter to that, which is Kyuzamufune. You see a 70-year-old thin, frail man throwing around young, very much bigger, much stronger, much more fit people at will. And I mean, in my opinion, what he shows is gorgeous Aikido, although he's a judoka. But he shows the beauty and elegance of using efficiency as opposed to strength. But my guess is, even as a 70-year-old man, that guy was very, very fit. Probably not in comparison to a 30-year-old, but he had such a mastery of how the human body worked. Like that, and he was, even at the amount of experience he had in judo, he was still extraordinary. Like, the idea that an average judoka, even after the number of years that Kyuzamufune had in judo, would get to his ability of being able to feel and manipulate a human body with his level of skill, I think is probably, the odds are against it. And so, but the physicality and being strong and fit is something that everybody is capable of doing, and it makes such a difference in your martial arts that I think it's good not to overlook that.
Well, there are multiple kinds of strength, right? I mean, if you
Hmm.
talking about judo, look at the famous Kimura Masahiko. I think that's his first name. But that the now Brazilian jiu-jitsu technique, the Kimura, is named after. Like, he was a huge guy, and it was very strong. He talked about working out 20 hours a day, you know, sleeping 4 hours just to work out again. And he was a big, strong guy, very different than Mifune,
Hmm.
and so there's those different levels of strength. Like the two guys that I was training with this morning, in our early morning BJJ class, they're both half my size, and it doesn't matter. They're both really, really well skilled, and they're both one of them is in extremely good shape. He's a personal trainer, and the other one is just very wiry and very, I guess, say sinewy, and both of them use their leverage and angling and good defense and all those different kind of things to give me not only a hard time, but most of the time to beat me, because they're that much better than me and they're half my size, and they've been doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu longer than I have, and they're they're just better than me. But it just goes to show that, and like I said earlier, they're not using it to try to come at me head on. That's silly, right? But it also goes to show that Aikido is not the only martial art that that tries to leverage the strength instead of going against it.
In fact, I would say that
Um,
all of them do.
yeah,
If you,
ideally, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, if and even if you look at Mike Tyson boxing, if you really watch him boxing, most of the time he's trying to work to an angle where he can get his uppercuts in a way that you can't defend it. Now he's doing it with the the most devastating speed and power and you know um, violence and efficiency of movement, all of that. But he's still working to an angle because he's trying to diminish your ability to defend yourself through the way that he's attacking.
and moving around
I
a
mean,
defense to get to
exactly,
get to the point where
exactly.
he can attack safely while you cannot defend safely.
Yep. And then you get into the other level of strength that we're talking about, which is the internal strength side of things. And even within that, there's multiple layers. If you look um, at the newest version of Hidden in Plain Sight, there's a whole chapter on different kinds of strength that could be considered internal strength. And there's even within the internal strength practices like Tai Chi and Xingyi and Bagua and things like that. On the Chinese side of things, there are different ways that it manifests. Even if some of the stuff that they're doing is the same, the way that it manifests in different people is different because of the way that they train. There's hard qigong, soft qigong, all these different things that play into what the end result is. I just don't think that when we talk about Aikido and strength, I don't think that the kind of strength that O-sensei was, or his teacher Takeda Sokoku was trying to manifest, was the same kind that comes with being able to bench press a lot, or to be able to, I mean, squatting and deadlifting and all that stuff that ties into the fact that he had that farmer strength, but I think that was more something that he had to learn to get past in order to do Aiki. However, starting out strong isn't a bad thing,
Mhm.
but I don't think that that's the kind of strength that he was trying to get people to understand that he was using through Aikido. I think that that's a whole another, discussion into more complex practices and things like that. That again, like I said, I'm not an expert on, but I
I've no,
think that it's important to the discussion.
right, and I remember reading that Takaku Takeda made money traveling and doing feats of strength for people among his other teaching martial arts and whatnot. He was kind of almost like a in America where the traveling strongmen, would make money with circuses and what have you. I remember reading that. I don't recall what the reference was, but
Well, he was also a tiny guy who did sumo wrestling for fun and beat sumo wrestlers.
Mhm.
And he was tiny.
Yeah,
So it just
and he
goes to
was
show that.
extraordinarily strong, as was O-sensei.
Yep, exactly. But also that sort of ties into this discussion about, how we train. Well, if Takeda Sokoku was doing sumo wrestling competitively as he came up, and according to all sources was still doing it with his students as he got older, even into his dying years, then maybe that's important to do some kind of competitive grappling. And you could easily say, well, O-sensei didn't do that. Well, if he was a student of Takeda Sokoku, he did. We just don't hear about it. But if he was training with Takeda, he was doing that most likely. It's an easy conclusion to draw if Takeda was doing it as much as I think that he was.
And there are there are two things that strike me there as well, and that is that firstly, both men, Takeda and O-sensei, started as very strong young men who probably learned as they grew older that there's a old man strength, which is I count it as like a smart strength by using leverage, versus the raw strength of being young and having the vibrancy of youth. And I think they probably learned that as time went along and said, oh, hey, leverage is really useful. Yes, raw strength is useful, but leverage is too. And so I think also both of them probably felt, as any, I guess, fit, strong, young competitor would feel, that as they grow older, they don't want to give up engaging their strength in competing with those who are fit, because that tests your strength.
Frankly,
it helps make you stronger and keep you
it's
fit.
a lot of fun, right? So that's the part that a lot of people miss, is that it's a lot of fun. Like, there's a reason that if you put a couple little boys together, and I'm not saying that's not true for girls too, but I'm not one. If you put a couple little boys together and you don't give them any distractions, you don't give them any toys, TV, video games, whatever, they will start wrestling with each other. It's inevitable. If you put adult men together and give them enough alcohol, they will start wrestling together. I mean, it's just part of who we are, and it's part of what makes a mammal a mammal. Every mammal grapples in some way, and that's a stolen quote, but every mammal grapples in some way. And it's just part of who we are, which is why it's so much fun. So the question then that I have for Aikido practitioners who don't want to do anything competitive, when they talk about Aikido being natural movement and being part of nature, well, what about that part of nature? What about the part of nature that is competitive? What about the part of nature that wants to grapple, right? And even if it's just for fun, you don't have to go for trophies. You don't have to go for awards. Like, it can just be in a friendly, safe environment with other people who are trying to choke you back or armbar you back or whatever. Well, maybe that's the part of the training that Takeda had, that O-sensei had, that rounded them out, that made them not afraid to do Aikido as Aikido, right? Or like in Takeda's case, Daitoryu. So like, if you have that as a foundation, you're much more capable of experimenting with more esoteric practices, because you can always revert to the thing that works. If you don't have the thing that works, then all you're doing is playing around with theory. And at the end of the day, if that theory is tested in a real situation where there's actual violence and your theory was wrong, you're in a lot of trouble, And so I think that there should be this foundation. And I'm saying this as someone who started out with Hapkido for many years, absolutely opposed to the competition side of martial arts, and got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Quite frankly, I got into it because Takeda did sumo. Like, that's a really funny reason to get into it. but that's the reason that I started doing it. It's like, well, what is the sumo of my time? Well, it's easy to find a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school, easier than it is to find a judo school in my area. So, and my brother was doing it. I have other friends that are doing it. Like, let me try that. And it's proven to me that, one, I love the Aikido side of things, and I also love grappling, right? And where those two things come together is, I think, a very, it's not it's not for everybody, where at the point that those two things meet is not for everybody, but I think for the people that do come to that place where they enjoy both, then that's the kind of person I want to train with, you know. And I think that there's something really special to be found there, especially in the free exchange of ideas that comes with, well, you know, I was trying this the other day on this person, but they did this, this, and this to me. You know, let's experiment with how to fix this so that when when I'm using this Aikido principle, this Aikido technique, how do I use that, and so that I again am successful in the violent encounter, and I'm using violence in quotes there because it's still just play at the end of the day in the dojo. But how do I use this technique or this principle in a way that lends itself to me being successful and also not compromising my integrity? Like, I shouldn't have to eye gouge somebody or bite them in order to, and this is sort of a joke, but it comes up in a lot of forums. Well, I would just eye gouge you, if you tried to throw me, or whatever. If you tried that Brazilian jiu-jitsu stuff on me, I would just poke you in the eye. Well, how do you win the violent encounter in such a way that both people remain safe without reverting to that kind of thing? How do you maintain your integrity and still come out on top of it, right? Because, like I said, at the end of the day, we're still here for survival, and to perpetuate our species, so to speak. But we have to be able to do that with some level of morality. And I think that that's the interesting equation,
And if you come back to the point of Aikido is not about fighting, well, if you approach it that, well, I need to be biting, eye gouging, and kicking people in the groin, well,
right.
now you're pretty much becoming exactly the fighting aspect.
Yeah, or worse. I mean,
worse. I'm just going to trump fighting by being more fighty than the other person.
Right, you become a 5-year-old. I mean, that's how the untrained little kids that we deal with, that's how they're trying to fight. We're teaching them how to be better people, and I think that if somebody's done Aikido for 20 years and they're still talking about biting and eye gouging, it's like, well, what did you learn for the past 20 years?
That's a great point. Great point. And you raised some great questions. In fact, I'm going to invite people that are listening to post in the comments if they've got some interesting perspectives on anything you heard today, or even some of the questions that Robert brought up here, sort of wrap things up, because these are great things to think about. And I know, Robert, we could probably spend all day afternoon talking today, because this is fascinating.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, so thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to hearing what people say about it. So thanks very much, Robert. Is there anything you'd like to say or plug in the end here?
I would just say that you can find, if you're in Maryland, you can find our dojo at kogendojo.com. And then my blog, which I write every day, is holisticbudo.com. And then the larger organization is not very large. There's 3 founding members that I'm a part of, with Ellis Amdur as a consultant, so to speak, is Taikyoku Mind and Body. So the idea behind Taikyoku is that Ellis discovered while consulting an Aikido dojo a number of years back that if you look at the Aikido techniques that Ueshiba was doing, that O-sensei was doing, it basically came down to, he had 5 movement patterns that he was following. You have like Ikkyo, which is up and down, Nikkyo, which is side to side, Sankyo, spiraling up and away from the body, Yankyo, spiraling down and towards the body, and Gokyo, which is a little bit of an anomaly. But he took those and created a solo practice that he refers to more along the lines of themes. So you have Ikkyoku, which is the theme of rising and falling, Nikkyoku, which is the theme of sort of a figure eight side to side, so on and so forth, and created a solo practice around those. That became the basis for Taikyoku Aikido, which is what he was helping to develop a number of years back at a dojo in Pennsylvania. It sort of split off, and that's where my teacher Bud Yu has started playing around with these principles of these vectors from the Taikyoku Aikido, along with the internal strength things that he had been learning from Mike Sigmund, and then started applying them in other avenues. So playing around with them with striking, with boxing, with judo, grappling, and things like that, and discovered that they were really universally applicable. And that ended up becoming what we call Taikyoku Budo, which is essentially a martial art that incorporates Aikido principles through Aikido techniques, grappling techniques, and striking techniques with internal strength as a foundation. And you can find more about that if you contact me or if you go to taikyokumindandbody.com. So that's it. I really appreciate the discussion. I really appreciate being asked. It was a lot of fun.
Great. Thank you, Robert. It was great to have you on, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again in the near future. I look forward to it a great deal.
Definitely. Thanks, Tristan.
What other topics are you interested in hearing covered in this podcast? Please share your ideas in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or go to the Facebook group Aikido the Martial Side and post a comment there. You can also support this podcast by donating either through a monthly sponsorship or a single donation of any amount that you like. I always enjoy hearing from listeners of the show, whether through comments or questions. Thank you all for sharing your interest. Enjoy your training.